So, it's been a while since I've covered a bad game on this channel, and after playing a few I actually enjoy, I think I'm due for one. And my god, do I have a shocker today. The game in question is Skull Island Rise of Kong, and as you can see from the Steam reviews, it's not doing so well. It's being absolutely torn to shreds online, which makes sense because it's the biggest piece of shit I've played in a very long time. How someone saw this and thought, you know what, that's pretty good, then proceeded to release it on Steam is a complete mystery, because my god, this might be the worst game of the year. So without further ado, let's find out how bad this game really is. The story here is pretty straightforward. Kong's parents get killed by a generic red dinosaur and then you get revenge. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I mean, to be fair, it's not the worst part of the game, since it's so bland and unoriginal that realistically nothing can go wrong, and I suppose the story narrations are fairly well voice acted, but then again, they're narrations for a story that's so uninteresting you just won't care. And if you are in the tiny minority that does, the rest of the game will make absolutely fucking sure the story is the last thing on your mind. So while it's technically the best part of the game, that is the furthest thing possible from a compliment. So before I start, I want to say that using the King Kong license seems like the worst possible decision they could have made, and genuinely seems to have made things so much worse for the developers. If this was some shit called Old Mate Gorilla, then it would have just faded into the endless sea of terrible Steam games, but because they've used such a well-known property, they're guaranteed to be in the spotlight and thus get shafted by the entire internet. Everything about this game is horrendous. The only redeeming quality is the fact it's mercifully short and only took me around 6 hours to complete. Begs the question why they're charging such an egregious amount of money for it, especially considering what you actually get for that price. For starters, the graphics are hideous, and I know graphics aren't everything, but when it looks worse than a King Kong game that came out nearly 20 years ago, you know something hasn't gone well. Almost all the textures look horrible. They're bland, they're boring, they move constantly, and it genuinely looks like something you'd find on the App Store, which would be fine if it was a mobile app, but it's not. It's a £34 game, which in this case is criminal. The biggest offender has to be Kong himself, because instead of a colossal fearsome ape, you get this. This isn't King Kong. This is the goofy-ass off-brand Nickelodeon version of King Kong, the version who just so happens to be the smallest thing on Skull Island. Like, his main feature is his size, yet here he feels only marginally bigger than an average gorilla, since they've made no effort at all to scale him to his surroundings. Everything in the game, be it trees, bushes, rocks or other enemies, is the same size or bigger, to the point where the game might as well be called Slightly Large Gorilla, because that's all it is. Now, I might be able to somewhat ignore these problems if at the heart of it there was some solid gameplay, but as expected there isn't, it's complete garbage. The way it works is you enter an area, do 3 or 4 enemy clearing objectives called Ascension events, kill the boss, then rinse and repeat for the next 6 hours. And if that doesn't sound at all fun, that's because it isn't. The bulk of it consists of bland, boring platforming around lifeless maps. Oh, and if you were like me, thinking this poison area might, poison you, well, it doesn't. It does fuck all, just like all the other areas. Although being dull isn't the worst part. No, the worst part is they've made them stupidly hard to navigate. Like, the game provides a map that you can't see yourself on, which as you can imagine is incredibly unhelpful, and while you can roar to supposedly get a general idea of where you are, surprise surprise, it doesn't work. Meaning most of the time you end up completely lost, doubling back on the same location 15 times before you randomly stumble across where you're supposed to be going. All of this while you enjoy a grand total of 0 environmental hazards, 0 activities, no NPCs and no fall damage. Oh, but they do have collectibles, so that basically redeems the entire game. Now, in terms of combat, it should come as no surprise that it's awful, and despite the game having a wider array of moves than you'd expect, they're broken down into two categories. Number 1, you won't use them because they don't work, and number 2, they do work but you still won't use them. In reality, you only need 3. The shoulder barge to stun enemies, the basic 3-hit combo, and maybe the heavy attack. That's it. Sure, you can use the others, but 99% of the time there's no point. As far as I can tell, they do only slightly more damage than regular attacks, but have a longer wind-up and hit less often. And this is all assuming you even bother fighting to begin with. See, the game provides a skill tree, giving you new attacks and buffs that can be unlocked with skill points. These come exclusively from boss fights and ascension events, meaning every other enemy in the game is nothing more than an easily avoidable mild inconvenience that you have no incentive to fight. I mean, realistically, why would you? You already waste enough time battling the game's evil level design, why would you waste even more on enemies that provide absolutely nothing? And it's not like there's any variety to these fights. Every enemy is dealt with in the exact same way. Whether it be crabs, dinosaurs, spiders, or worms, you just stand there, blindly hit everything in sight regardless of what it is, and eventually they'll die. On top of that, despite the game rewarding you with them, you don't have much incentive to get the skills either, since much like the enemies, you don't need them. You can very easily complete the game without spending a single skill point, and whether you have all the upgrades or none of them, the difference is marginal. It reaches the point where almost every feature in the game can be perfectly summed up with the phrase, "Yeah, but why would I?" "Oh look, there's enemies over there, you should fight them." "Yeah, but why would I?" "Oh look, you have skill points to invest." "Yeah, but why would I?" It offers no incentive to do anything. So on top of the standard enemies, you also get some boss fights. These consist of a giant worm, a giant crab, 3 dinosaurs at once, a giant spider, and the dinosaur from the start. All of these are different, but something they have in common is they're all shit. Granted, they do at least try to stand out with their unique designs, but it doesn't change the fact that these have to be some of the easiest, most underwhelming boss fights I've ever played, and the only positive thing about them is how hilariously terrible the cutscenes are. These might as well be basic enemies with more health, since the exact same strategy, if you can call it that, also applies here. Just wail on them non-stop and eventually they'll die. The only one that changes this slightly is the spider boss, since you have to use a rock first, but outside of that, calling them bosses is incredibly dubious. Also, much like the rest of the game, they're just badly designed. For example, the crab boss, you can easily jump to an area where he can't hit you, then just pelt him with rocks. So it should come as no surprise that this game is completely unfinished and full of glitches, several of them being game-breaking. As for the ones I actually saw, my controls would stop working, enemies got stuck in barriers during ascension events, I'd get stuck running in place, unable to move until I restarted the game, and I'd get stuck in certain ledges, also needing a restart. So it should go without saying that this game is arse and you definitely shouldn't buy it. It's boring, glitchy, ugly, overpriced, lazily designed, confusing, basically everything you don't want from a video game. And while it's by no means the worst game I've ever played, I can easily see this being the worst game of the year. Especially since for some reason this game has DLC, and for an extra £12.79 you get 8 exclusive filters, 8 Kong variants, and boss rush mode. Which means this game with all its extras costs £47. That's literally the price of a AAA game. Like, I thought Fast and Furious Crossroads was bad value for money, but this is on another level. Ironically, in its own way, it is the king, not of Skull Island, but the king of making you feel like you've been robbed once you play it. Anyway, long story short, do not buy this game, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.